Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi, and for literally years now, I've been coming on YouTube and other social media platforms to talk about Arena from a unique budget perspective for new players, for free-to-play players, or just any old player with a budget. And at the same time, I have strategically ignored Magic the Gathering Online, a very similar platform, but it lacked the nuance and free-to-play accessibility that Arena has had. That is, until recently. But before we get into all that, take just a moment to like, comment, and subscribe, because that kind of thing really keeps this boat moving. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, right. For literally years now, Magic Online has been a good client, but not necessarily budget or free-to-play playable, at least not to the extent that Arena has been. The main being is even when you paid the fee to unlock and get a premium account, your starter collection consisted of 4 of each common in standard and 2 copies of each uncommon, also currently in standard. There was no rares, there was no pre-constructed decks, really nothing. And they gave you enough points, and we'll talk about those later, to get you started in a couple of events and whet your appetite. But basically, you couldn't build a real deck. And I say that as a person who makes a lot of content focused on budget deck building, using mostly commons and uncommons, but the fact is, not having any rares, no pre-constructed decks, it really had an opportunity to leave a lot of players, well, frankly, lost. And they've made some changes that, while I don't think solve everything, certainly push us in the right direction. So just this week, the fine folks at MtGO announced that they were making changes to the new player kits. And just as a note, these are only for new players, i.e. new accounts, but later on in this series, we'll discuss ways that existing accounts can take advantage of this too, but we're not going to jump straight into that. Basically, the primary change here is to that new account starter kit, because now it comes with 5 pre-built decks, all the cards you need for those decks, and those 5 decks cover the 5 most played formats on MtGO, primarily those same formats that you cannot functionally play on Arena. There is also an account upgrade kit still available for $5. It will bring in even more value to you, and again, we will cover that later in this series. But for now, in addition to those 5 decks in the basic account, you also get 20 new player points to let you play some beginner level events, and also comes with 2 of each common from recent sets and 2 avatars. Think of those as your face in the game, but on a much more limited basis. So to start you off with a base account, they still give you 2 copies of each common currently available in standard. Sadly, it's still not really enough to do much of anything. However, one of the changes that they made is in other products, and that is actually a total of 5 decks. I've already opened one of them. But these give you a playable deck from day one in 5 different categories, and each one represents one of the 5 base monocolor concepts. The first, of course, is a mono red legacy burn, a mono green modern infect, a mono blue Pauper Delver deck, as well as a mono white Pioneer Humans deck. And a lot of these are actually fairly solid decks. It's not like they just gave you a deck that won't do anything for you or that you'll just throw away. And then, of course, the final mono black deck is actually a commander deck featuring braids here. And for those that don't know, it's, I think, the only legendary that you get in this deck. There's no like second commander you can switch it out with or whatnot. But generally a pretty good deck. And when we look at a lot of the card choices, they gave you some pretty staple stuff here, like a Reliquary Tower, a Soul Ring, Wayfarer's Bauble, and a Mind Stone. We also have a copy of Iron Crag, which I think is going to become kind of a commander staple. And we also have Solemn Simulacrum. And these are all cards that I've been recommending on Arena for years. And of course, there's like 90 other cards that deal with the thematic black aspects of the deck. And really, it ends up being fairly good here. Oh, and I take that back. They do actually give you a Massacre Girl in here as well, so you could swap that out as a legendary. The Bleak Hearted is in here. Actually, there's several. Ayara. That's what I get for not really having looked at it too closely. So they give you 3 or 4 legendaries that you could potentially swap out. Now, of course, not all of them are going to be quite as good in the deck as built, but it certainly gives you a solid starting point for Commander. However, there are some missing components here. Like you'll notice there's no command tower. There is no specific to Commander cards. It's just a very basic starter deck. Now, let's take a look at some of the other base decks that it comes with. And I'm just going to move down the line here and talk first about the mono white Pioneer Humans deck. And obviously, since this is more of a 60 card constructed, there's a lot less individual cards to talk about. One thing you will notice out of this new MtGO is the formats that they chose to support, namely Pioneer, Modern, Legacy, Commander, and Pauper. If you notice, those are all formats that you can't really play on Arena. Yes, we have Brawl, that's kind of like Commander, but here you get to play real 4-player Commander. Pauper is a thing they do incidentally on Arena. Modern has kind of come around with Timeless a little bit. Pioneer has its analog of Explorer, but here you get the real formats. And also you'll notice there's no alchemy, there's no historic formats to talk about because those cards simply don't exist in MtGO. So they have really focused on making this distinctly different from alchemy, and I think that's a good thing, and I think that's a good reason to be interested in this. Now, you will also notice that these decks have sideboards because for the most part, you're playing traditional Magic, meaning best of 3. There are some best of 1 options, but they're few and far between, and they're not particularly rewarding. Arena is going to remain a better best of 1 option there. But when we look at these cards, literally about half the non-land slots are actually standard playable. So even though they didn't directly give you a standard deck, leaning into things like Recruitment Officer, Intrepid Adversary, Guardian of New Benalia, Ossification, Spellbook Mender, and Adeline, a full play set of Thalia, Sunguard Sentinel. Many of these cards could contribute to not only something like mono white humans, mono white soldiers, but maybe something like Boros as well. So they gave you some tools to allow your collection to start to grow, especially when you think about the fact that you also have all of the standard commons as well. By comparison, when we look at the mono green Infect deck for Modern, we see almost no standard cards. In fact, I think the only things here that are considered standard legal are the Forest, and then we've got Audacity in there from Brothers War. The sideboard, again, is fully functional and has some very nice stuff in there, including Tornad's Crypt, and Guttural Response is a very nice, solid sideboard card that you see quite a bit. Overall, a great deck, but outside of Modern, this is probably not anything really adding a lot to your collection. Surprisingly, though, when we look at the mono red Legacy Burn deck, you actually have quite a lot to work with here. In fact, about half of the non-land, sideboard cards within this deck are actually Pauper playable, including hits like Chain Lightning, Lightning Bolt, Monastery Swift Spear, Smash to Smithereens from the sideboard, and Rift Bolt and Skewer the Critics. This could actually be kind of recomposed into a maybe mono red burn deck for Pauper, as well as maybe some sort of Is It build, Is It spells for Pauper. And speaking of Pauper, when we take a look at the mono blue Delver deck for Pauper, we see, obviously, all the cards are Pauper playable, but we see a good bit of standard playables in here as well, like Consider, Delver of Secrets, Spell Pierce, and Tolarian Terror. Again, many of these things will combine nicely with some of the things from the red deck to give you another potential Pauper option. Now, outside of the cards and decks, of course, there are some other things going on here. The main thing is the new player points that you get, and you receive 20 just for opening the account, no investment whatsoever. However, those new player points are somewhat restrictive. In Constructed, you can play what is called a Gauntlet event, either in Commander or Modern. The Commander requires 6 new player points, and again, you start with 20. The Modern requires only 2. The prizes on this, you will play 3 matches. If you win all 3, you win 10 play points. More on that later. If you only win 2 out of the 3, you only get 5 play points. That's for the Modern. And let's see here. For the Commander Gauntlet, again, you will play 3 games. Even if you only win 1, you get 5 points, 10 for 2 wins, and 30 for 3 wins. And of course, those play points unlock entirely new, robust events available that you will need, in some cases, hundreds of play points to mess around with. In Limited, you also have a draft event of sorts, the Super Jump In Phantom for 10 new player points. I don't believe Sealed gives any. No, it does not. And then again, you also have those same Gauntlet style events. So a few things that you can do without any initial investment. And if we jump back to Constructed for just a moment, we just take a look at, say, Standard, for instance. You can do open play in pretty much any Constructed environment without the need of any new player or play points. But of course, there are things that we don't get. Outside of the cards in those 5 decks, there are no rares and mythics in your starting collection, just those commons. You also have little to no fixing. When it comes to lands, it's just those common pieces, the colorless equipment, artifacts and things like that. that are meant to assist in limited for fixing. Nothing really beyond that. So there's definitely room to improve. And the way to do that is actually through the Magic Online upgrade kit for the grand total of $5. And that's actually what we're going to be talking about in our next video, is upgrading the account, because not only do you pick up like 5,000 more cards, but it opens up an entire new world of opportunities that really can make Magic Online a free-to-play environment for the rest of your play experience on it. And before we go, I want to take just a moment to thank my totally awesome patrons for supporting me and allowing me to apply my passion into a community. And of course, before we go, I've got some suggestions for your next step.